This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Make another smart choice with AutoQuote Explorer to compare rates from multiple car insurance companies all at once. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Save on Cox Internet when you add Cox Mobile and get fiber-powered internet at home and unbeatable 5G reliability on the go. So whether you're playing a game at home,
yes, goal,
or attending one live,
goal,
you can do more without spending more. Learn how to save at cox.com/internet. Cox Internet is connected to the premises via coaxial cable. Cox Mobile runs on the network with unbeatable 5G reliability as measured by Ookla LLC in the U.S. 2H 2023. Results may vary, not an endorsement. Other restrictions apply.
During the final hours of Joe Biden's presidency, some 30,000 migrants waiting in Mexico had appointments on the books to meet with U.S. immigration officials in hopes of claiming asylum.
So we decided, without knowing what would happen, what would be the fate of the program itself, to see if migrants were still going to show up for their appointments and what would happen if they tried to go up on the bridge.
Arelis Hernandez covers immigration and the border for the Washington Post. She had a hunch that led her to spend Inauguration Day in Ciudad Juarez, a Mexican border town just across from El Paso, Texas. Leading up to Inauguration Day, what was the mood like for the people waiting for their appointments?
For the individuals that I spoke to and spent some time with early on Monday, there was sort of a tentative optimism. They were abiding by the faith that if the United States had given them this date for their appointment, this long-awaited appointment, that the United States government would indeed honor that. But every single one of those people knew and understood that there was a possibility that their appointments would not be honored.
That possibility turned into reality starting pretty much the minute Donald Trump took over. And the way that nearly everyone found out was on an app, specifically the CBP One app. In an effort to discourage asylum seekers from crossing the border outside of official ports of entry, the Biden administration had made everyone download the app to secure an appointment with immigration officials.
So around 10 a.m. Mountain Time, I started hearing from folks, different sources, that it appeared as though the app had been canceled. At that moment, I was spending time with a young man named Fidel Jimenez from Cuba, who had an appointment for 1 p.m. I asked Fidel to then open his CBP One app and see what message he was getting. And he opened it up, and that's when we saw the message that said, that appointments have been canceled and that your appointment time is no longer valid. It was sort of a suspended animation, if you will, where everyone was just on their phones trying to verify, trying to see if they can get back into the app. And when it dawned on them that this was real and that the 11 a.m. hour came and they went up the bridge and talked to CBP officials, is when you started seeing the breakdown, the emotional breakdown.
Many of these breakdowns were caught on camera. This is Margelis Tinoco. She'd been kidnapped and ransomed twice while waiting to enter the U.S. What do Margelis and her family, what are they planning to do from this point on?
Margelis is Colombian born, but she's lived in Venezuela for the past 3 decades, raised her son there, met her husband there. So they're from Venezuela. They don't think they can go back. They don't have money to travel back to Mexico City where they had been. So right now they're just kind of stuck. But I think the vast majority of folks are going to wait it out to see what happens. The other option being trying to do it illegally, but there are inherent risks with that as well.
Even though the right to claim asylum is baked into both U.S. and international law, with Trump's executive orders coming down it's not clear how long that will last.
There is something to be said about whether the right to asylum at the U.S.-Mexico border will persist in the new Trump administration. The optics of migrants having their chances at legal entry to the United States thwarted certainly plays into the perceived result that many, many people who voted for Trump wanted to see happen, right? They wanted to see this flow stop. They wanted immigrants and illegal, legal, otherwise, to think twice before asking to enter the country or trying to enter the country. But I also think it was a rude awakening for people who probably didn't understand immigration all that well, didn't know about what all this meant and how it's really affecting, real people and the processes that they had hope would bring them opportunity in the United States.
Today on the show, is the U.S.-Mexico border closed? I'm Rob Gunther, in for Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It is extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example of doublenomics. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
This episode is brought to you by NRDC. Our nation's environmental safeguards face their gravest challenge ever. The new Trump administration is moving quickly to dismantle decades of protections for our clean air, water, and public lands. The Natural Resources Defense Council has proved it can stop these attacks. NRDC filed the first environmental lawsuit against the previous Trump administration and maintained a blistering pace, filing 163 legal challenges and winning victories in nearly 90% of resolved cases to protect wolves, bees, and other endangered species, block the Keystone XL pipeline, regulate chemicals hazardous to our health, and more. Now, NRDC is launching the legal fund to stop the Trump agenda. For a limited time, all donations will be doubled to help power their strongest legal defense of our environment yet. From climate protection to endangered species, what we do now will determine the world our children inherit. Make your match gift at nrdc.org/podcast.
The day after Donald Trump announced a blitz of immigration-related executive orders, this preacher, Right Reverend Mary Ann Edgar Buddy, went viral.
Let me make one final plea, Mr. President.
She delivered the sermon at Trump's national prayer service. Trump, his kids, JD and Usha Vance, they were all sitting right up front. And Reverend Buddy used that moment to plead with him to have mercy on LGBTQ young people and on immigrants.
And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meatpacking plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals.
The moment came the same day Trump's Department of Homeland Security announced it was revoking a Biden-era policy that stopped ICE from raiding hospitals, schools, and churches. Independent journalist Jose Olivares has covered immigration for years. He says the whole thing just underscored mercy, sanctuary, they're not what Trump is going for.
What's significant is that churches have historically been seen as a safe space for immigrants to go and to worship and to seek refuge as well. We saw under the first Trump administration how a lot of these churches were being used by undocumented folks to take refuge and to shield themselves from immigration enforcement activities. But now Trump has reversed that. And he's allowing federal immigration agents to enter these sensitive locations. And essentially the message that the Department of Homeland Security is sending now is that, if you're undocumented, you're not safe anywhere, right? You're not safe in a school, you're not safe in a church, you're not safe in a hospital. We have the ability to enter these so-called sensitive locations and conduct enforcement operations here.
So much of the pushback during the first Trump administration had to do with so-called sanctuary cities, right? It was always a thing that the president invoked as a reason why his immigration policies weren't being fully implemented. He's threatening a similar crackdown on democratic cities this time around. Do you know what's happening here?
Yes. So sanctuary jurisdictions, essentially what they mean is that local officials, whether they be, state police officers or local sheriff's departments or local police departments, if they arrest someone for a minor crime, they won't necessarily contact ICE, right? It doesn't mean that ICE is not allowed to conduct its work. It doesn't mean that ICE is not allowed to make arrests and put people in deportation proceedings. It just means that local jurisdictions, local police departments, local sheriff's departments don't necessarily contact ICE whenever there is a minor crime that is committed by an undocumented immigrant, right? Now, what we're seeing with one of these executive orders that Trump passed is that he's threatening to bar any federal funds from sanctuary jurisdictions. The Trump administration is also threatening to undertake any civil or criminal action if this local jurisdiction interferes with federal immigration law. Not only that, we're also going to be seeing with one of these executive orders how local police departments and local sheriff's departments can essentially receive the permission from federal immigration agents to conduct anti-immigrant operations as well and to act as federal immigration agents.
Both revoking the sensitive locations policy and targeting so-called sanctuary cities are sure to result in footage of uniformed officers conducting raids, people thrown out of their homes, even children pulled out of classrooms. Jose says those images are kind of the point.
Certainly, we're going to be seeing a tremendous PR show from not just the Trump administration, but from right-wing outlets that are aligned with Trump. We're going to be seeing how they are going to continue to push this narrative of how dangerous migrants are, of the invasion that migrants are supposedly taking part in as they enter the U.S., right? And all of this is to justify a lot of these executive orders and a lot of the right-wing policies that are being put in place by the Trump administration. We're seeing how Trump has called the situation at the border a national emergency, how he wants to protect against a so-called invasion. We saw this week how with one of the executive orders, Trump has called for a national emergency and is using it to send the military to the border. And, he's saying he wants to seal the border to repel mass migration, right? Those are the words, the exact words he's using in his executive orders to police and do border security, to beef up surveillance, right? And this is not necessarily new, right? He declared it a national emergency in 2019 and unlocked federal funds to further construct the border wall. But I think what we're seeing now with these executive orders is a much more forceful and quick approach to immigration enforcement in the US. And I think that combined with the sort of PR efforts, not just by the Trump administration, but by right-wing media that supports him, I think we're going to continue to see how these very heavy-handed, essentially militarized approaches to immigration are going to be justified in this way.
You talked about the declaration of a national emergency. I'm wondering, do we know exactly what the emergency is? Has that been defined?
According to Trump and people who are aligned with Trump, they're saying that the national emergency is the high number of immigrants who are reaching the border and requesting asylum, or are reaching the border and crossing between ports of entry and entering illegally into the U.S., right? And so even though it's not necessarily new, he's saying that because immigrants and asylum seekers are reaching the U.S. border, requesting asylum, sometimes crossing between ports of entry and entering the country illegally, he's saying it's a national emergency. A lot of this is also tied in with, the Trump and Republican camp, their equation of migrants and Latin American organized crime. A lot of it also has to do with using the fentanyl crisis as justification to continue to do these heavy-handed immigration policy approaches. It's just this also very right-wing, this coded language, equating immigrants and asylum seekers with organized crime that is coming from Latin America.
And needless to say, on top of all these additional new measures, we're also going to be seeing a resumption of border wall building, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no question about it that they're going to be continuing with constructing the border wall, right? But let's also remember that some of the construction of the border wall also took place under the Biden administration, even though he promised that was going to end. we did see some of the border wall continue to be constructed under the Biden administration. And so we can critique Trump as much as we want, as we rightly should, but I think we should also level some of those critiques at the Democrats and at the Biden administration for not necessarily doing enough to prevent these sort of extreme right-wing anti-immigrant policies from being put into place.
After the break, the wave of executive orders and how they might actually look in practice.
This episode is brought to you by NRDC. Our nation's environmental safeguards face their gravest challenge ever. The new Trump administration is moving quickly to dismantle decades of protections for our clean air, water, and public lands. The Natural Resources Defense Council has proved it can stop these attacks. NRDC filed the first environmental lawsuit against the previous Trump administration and maintained a blistering pace, filing 163 legal challenges and winning victories in nearly 90% of resolved cases to protect wolves, bees, and other endangered species, block the Keystone XL pipeline, regulate chemicals hazardous to our health, and more. Now, NRDC is launching the legal fund to stop the Trump agenda. For a limited time, all donations will be doubled to help power their strongest legal defense of our environment yet. From climate protection to endangered species, what we do now will determine the world our children inherit. Make your match gift at nrdc.org/podcast.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
We actually discussed extensively on this show yesterday the termination of birthright citizenship. Now, our listeners will know Trump intends to do this by denying federal documents like passports and social security numbers to children of immigrants. And given the way the order is currently written, it's my understanding that it's not just undocumented immigrants. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about the legal issues here, but even if it is or isn't legal, even if it ultimately gets tied up in the courts, what kind of chaos are we going to see this policy produce in the meantime?
I mean, I think it's important to note that over 20 states have filed the lawsuits, including DC and San Francisco also, in addition to the 22 states, have filed a lawsuit saying that this policy, this executive order violates the 14th Amendment. And what it does is it refuses to recognize U.S. citizenship for children born in the U.S. to mothers who are in the country illegally or who are here temporarily, such as visa holders, right? So people with student visas, people with H-1B visas, if they give birth to a child, that child under this executive order would not qualify for U.S. citizenship, right? And so what are the chilling effects that we can see from this? I think that still remains to be seen, but I think they're going to be quite significant. Will local officials now be deputized in order to screen people to see if they're here illegally or not, or have temporary visas or not? That remains to be seen how this is going to be actually put into place. But again, I think the logistics of it maybe don't necessarily matter as much as the chilling effect and the fear that is going to be felt throughout the country with immigrant communities.
So another one of the orders that falls under the is this legal umbrella, the partial suspension of the asylum and refugee programs. The U.S. refugee admissions program has been suspended for at least 120 days, and asylum policies have been tightened. But refresh my memory, the right to seek asylum is enshrined not just in U.S. law, but in international law.
That's correct. So the right to seek asylum is an international law that is recognized by countries around the world. So if you're fleeing persecution, if you're fleeing violence, you can request asylum at certain countries, and then the individual countries will decide if they want to grant you asylum or not through their own processes. And now this also coincides with the suspension of the refugee program. So we're seeing one of these executive orders has suspended the U.S. refugee admissions program, right? And it's significant because refugees who don't qualify the same as asylum seekers, right? I think it's important to recognize it's a different process. But many refugees who are fleeing climate change, wars, etc., maybe even folks who worked with the U.S. government as translators and interpreters in war zones, who might qualify to be refugees, are no longer going to be admitted to the U.S. as refugees, right? And so I think this is significant because it's not just an attack on asylum rights; it's also an attack on refugee rights, right? Which are separate things. We're seeing also as part of this how the Trump administration is terminating a parole program that provided another legal pathway to entry for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. These certain countries within the Western Hemisphere that are seen by the U.S. government as, being ruled by political adversaries, or like in Haiti, just have really tremendous conflicts and problems there. And so I think it remains to be seen exactly what the chilling effects of this will be. But the suspension of the U.S. refugee admissions program is certainly a significant step. And so after 90 days, the Trump administration is going to review it, and they're going to decide whether they want to start it again. But still, even this 90-day period of the suspension will be significant for many refugees who already made plans to enter the U.S. or were already, on their way to enter the U.S. As refugees.
Trump has been very insistent on the campaign trail that the first group of immigrants he wants to deport and target are criminals. So one of these executive orders designates drug cartels and international gangs as global terrorists. It's supposed to, I guess, facilitate the use of existing anti-terrorism laws against them. What does that mean for immigration? What does that mean for the United States' war on drugs?
So this executive order that will designate Mexican cartels as terrorists is really significant. And there are so many questions here. I think it's important to note that these executive orders, I think they lack a fundamental understanding of how these organized crime groups function, right? Cartels, they're painted in the media as, these very homogenous groups of armed men with big hats and big belts, and they have guns, and, they shoot and they traffic drugs, and that's it, right? But I think it's important to understand that these organizations are businesses. There are sprawling networks. They have teams of attorneys, accountants, gunmen, drug runners. They have people from top-level negotiators who wear suits and ties and meet at fancy restaurants to negotiate drug trafficking, to the bottom-level folks who are children acting as scouts. It's important to recognize that organized crime is one of the largest private employers in Mexico. And so adding them to the terror list, like what is the extent of this? What is this going to look like? Are only the top level leaders of these cartels going to be classified as terrorists? Or is it everybody and anybody and any organization that supports them? And what about people who are extorted by organized crime groups, right? If they are paying money in order to be released from being kidnapped or whatever, would that then make them liable or get them into trouble for supporting a terrorist organization? We just don't know that. There are so many questions here, but it's something that is very, very worrisome, not just for asylum seekers and immigrants, but also for just international relations with the U.S. and Mexico and other countries.
I feel like for every executive order that I've brought up, the answer ultimately comes back to there are so many questions. We just have to wait and see how this plays out. But in the meantime, immigration enforcement is still going to be out there doing its job. What are the rules that they are going to be operating by? Are they just going to be assuming the will or an intent of the president? How is this going to work?
I think it's important to recognize that ICE as an agency, they are the ones that are in charge of conducting raids, of arresting people, etc. I think what we're seeing with these executive orders from Trump is that now local law enforcement is going to have more power to also conduct immigration operations in conjunction and in partnership with ICE. We're going to be seeing a heightened use of raids, right? We're going to see more raids from ICE at certain workplaces, targeting large groups of undocumented folks who might be working at factories, at farms, etc. What we're going to be seeing is a heightening of these operations, of these deportations, thanks to these executive orders. But let's remember that deportations and ICE's work has been ongoing regardless of presidential administration. We saw within Biden's last year in office, the Biden administration extended contracts for private immigration jails that are used by ICE to detain and deport immigrants, right? Although we're going to be seeing a heightened approach to immigration enforcement under the Trump administration, it is a bipartisan thing.
Yeah. Trump has promised to stop all illegal entry into the United States immediately upon taking office. The people scheduling appointments through the CBP One app, for instance, they did so legally. They were explicitly seeking legal entry. What does this move, for example, if you take this one move, what does that tell you about where his priorities lie here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to listen to his rhetoric saying that he wants to stop the illegal flows of undocumented folks. What's going to happen now with these executive orders is that the illegal entry of folks into the U.S. is going to rise, right? If people are not able to enter the U.S. through legal means, by requesting asylum, by scheduling appointments through the CBP One app to meet with immigration judges, to meet with asylum officers, people are desperate. We have to recognize that people migrate, people leave their home countries, not because they want to, but because they are forced to do so. If you block the legal access to enter the U.S., people are going to go through the illegal access. They're going to go through between ports of entry. They're going to be looking to human smuggling organizations and organized crime groups to help them enter the U.S. and be smuggled into the U.S. The effect that the Trump administration executive orders are going to have is not going to help the situation from the Trump-aligned people's perspective. It's only going to make the situation worse.
Jose Olivares, thank you so much for your time. I'm really grateful.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob.
Jose Olivares is an investigative journalist and immigration reporter, and Arelis Hernandez is an immigration reporter at The Washington Post based in Texas. And that's the show. A quick heads up, this week our sister show, What Next TBD, is launching a new series. It's called The Discourse. Every week, Lizzie O'Leary sits down with one of Slate's tech experts to talk about the news that's burning up our feeds. This week, they kick things off with Elon Musk and his inauguration hand gestures. But here's the thing. You can only hear The Discourse on Slate Plus. You can join Slate Plus directly from the What Next TBD show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/TBD Plus to get access wherever you listen. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Anna Phillips, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Rob Gunther, in for Mary Harris. Find me on Blue Sky. I'm at @OneRobGunther. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.